Go ahead, man. I'm sorry. Don't mind me.
Good morning. Glad to see everybody here this morning. We're studying in 1 Corinthians, the 15th chapter, and hopefully we'll get halfway through it today. We've been studying this for a couple weeks now. Probably got another week at least to go. We've been talking about the resurrection and the problems that they were having in Corinth between the ones who believed in the resurrection of the dead and the ones who didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead. So Paul is making a rather long defense of and making the point to the people there that the resurrection is a real thing, and that if it wasn't a real thing, then there would really not be a whole lot of sense in Christianity and the things that were going on, and that they're pretty much you live, you die, and that's it. And that would be a sad thing, and that's the thing that Paul is trying to overcome here. And obviously, as much time as he spent on this, there's opposition to the things that he's been teaching. That's why he's spending so much time on trying to to make this point with the church there at Corinth.
These people should have been aware of ones like Lazarus and the others that had seen these things.
Right.
And known it. Resurrection, is there.
Right.
They should know this.
Right. So before we go any further, I'd like for Carol Browning, if you would, to lead our minds in prayer.
Father in heaven, we're grateful for another wonderful day. And we worship you. We pray that our worship this morning was accepted to you. As you be with David as he heard tonight in this day, we pray that we'll gain much from it. We pray for the church globally and worldwide. We pray for growth, spiritually and numerically. We're grateful to live, Father, so that eventually we will you eternally in heaven. As we pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Okay, so today we're going to start at verse 20. We briefly touched that last week, but this is a different section, and Paul is kind of changing the focus here a little, still talking about the resurrection, but kind of giving it a contrast with the consequences of unbelief. So let's start with verse 20. It says, "But now hath Christ been raised from the dead, the first fruits of them that are asleep." And I think it's pretty clear that none of the Christians at Corinth denied the fact that Jesus was resurrected from the dead. I don't think that was the point. The point was, does anybody else other than Jesus raised from the dead? So Paul now is kind of taking a different tack and kind of bringing some things in from the Jewish religion into his conversation here, because there was still a very heavy Jewish influence there in the church at Corinth. Last week we talked about the influence of the Sadducees, the Christians there who were former Sadducees, and their belief that the resurrection resurrection, didn't take place. So he's changed his tack here, and he's starting to kind of make some references here to the Old Testament, and that the resurrection here was not a solitary occurrence that was only going to be affecting Jesus himself. But it's the resurrection of the head of the new church, and this is a pledge. This is an example of the things that are going to come. So he uses the reference here to first fruits, and this kind of denotes in a Jewish religion the first of anything or the beginning of anything, and it's in regard to a pledge, and this resurrection, it being the first fruit, is a pledge that as Christ was resurrected, so are the others going to be resurrected in the at the appropriate time. So he uses this to kind of talk to these Judaizing teachers there at Corinth, and it would kind of force them into making the observation that, they understood what the first fruits means, and this would force them into the observation that this is the same situation as some of the ancient ceremonies that the Jewish people did. They had to have the first fruits of everything had to be blessed, and it was a command by by God, by the Lord, that these things happen. And this is kind of a reference here to Leviticus 23, 9 through 11 that Paul is kind of drawing a reference to here. And this is again to bring it home to the Judaizing teachers there. And the resurrection of Christ compared with some fruits is a good harmony, and it agrees with the offerings that were made by the Jewish people. And it not only in the thing itself, but also the circumstances and the times that these things happened. That this was an example. And if you look at the death, the burial, the resurrection, all the things that happened with the crucifixion, there were so many tie-ins to the things that happened in the Old Testament and the timing that all these things happened. It was done during the Passover. Jesus came into Jerusalem on the day that the sacrifices were brought in. The sacrifice, the sacrifice that Jesus made, the sacrificing of his blood, the tie into the blood sacrifices in the Old Testament. All of these things, tied in together. And Jesus even was resurrected on the first day of the week, which was the day after the Sabbath. So all of these things tied in, and it had to have been crystal clear to these Judaizing teachers that this was the same type of situation, and that if Jesus died, fulfilled all the things in the Old Testament, the same were what he said was going to be true. And he talked about the resurrection of the dead, and like Philip said, these people had to know about some of the things that that had gone on previously, tied to to Jesus and the crucifixion and all that. So what Paul's saying here is Jesus is the first fruits of all the saints that are sleeping. He's the one who's going to raise first, and he's going to be the example of what's going to happen in the future. And our faith in the resurrection, rests on the fact that Jesus was raised from the dead, and thus we're going to be raised from the dead also at the appropriate time.
And the idea of the first fruits in the Jewish religion, as you well said, was very, very important. And it all goes back to the fact that if you obey the law and you presented this first fruits to the priest, as you were instructed to back in the Pentateuch, then you probably are opening the gates to abounding hearts. Probably going to have a good year, a good crop. Well, Jesus is the first fruits of those who have risen from the dead, tells us that there's going to be a lot of other people who are going to rise from the dead.
And there's going to be a good outcome, not a bad outcome. Any other comments about that verse? Okay, let's look then at verse 21. For since by man came death, by man came also the resurrection of the dead. So the resurrection of all that naturally follows the resurrection of Christ, as the death all follows the sin and the death of Adam. So it goes back to, Adam was, death came upon man because of sin. And because of that sin and because of what happened to Adam and Eve, death followed all the way through. Death is a thing that comes along with man. And as the same as death comes along with man, the resurrection comes along with Christ. It follows that way. We're all going to die and go into the ground, and then Christ went into the ground. He was resurrected from the dead and is now with the Father. And it's going to be the same for Christians. They're going to die. There's going to be a resurrection, and they're going to be with the Father also in heaven. So Christ basically is showing the way for the Christians through his resurrection. And Christ was obedient to the will of the Father, and as a result of that, he triumphed over death, and he was raised from the dead. If we're obedient to the things that God tells us to do, then we're going to have the same triumph over death. In the end, we'll be raised from the dead and go with the Father and live with him forever. So the world of mankind will be raised no more to live a fleshly life or die a fleshly death. In John 5:28, that they that have done good unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of the judgment. So all of the man is going to be resurrected. Where the difference is going to be in judgment, part of the resurrected, the ones who've obeyed the gospel, they're going to go to the resurrection of life. They're going to be with God in heaven. And the other, after judgment, their resurrection, they're going to be judged and they're going to end up in hell. So I mean, the resurrection is there for everybody. Just where you're going to end up is going to be the difference. So look at verse 22. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive. So that pretty much sums it up. What man lost through the disobedience of Adam is gained through the obedience to Christ. And the apostle here shows who he meant the former verse, who he's talking about it in verse 21. By the one man, the cause of death. By the other, the author of resurrection of the dead. And that he intended, he was talking here about Adam and Christ. And that was the reference that he was making. And that should have been clear to the people there at Corinth.
So he's talking about the humanity of Christ.
Correct.
Yes, he was eating, but yes, he was human, as Adam was human.
Right. That was my next line there, Bill. You stole my next line. Any other comments about that verse? Okay, let's look at verse 23. But each in his own order, Christ the first fruits, then they that are Christ's at his coming. So they will not all be raised at the same time. There is an order that has to go through. Christ will come forth first as the first fruit, and then he died on the cross. And when he did, and we've talked about this before, and in Matthew 7 and 27 and 52, it talks about this, that when he died on the cross, there were graves that opened up. And there was people who were, it says, fallen asleep. They were raised up and they came forth out of the tomb after, and they were resurrected there. And they went around the city and people knew who they were. Well, there's old so-and-so. He died last week, or he died last year. There he is walking around. Now, are those people alive today? They had to die again, right? So, this is a clear thing. Those who accept Christ and put him on live in him. 1 Thessalonians 4 and 16 and 17 shall the ones who shall rise first, then the ones that are dead shall rise first. And then we that are alive and left shall together be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and we be with the Lord forever. So in God's time, there's going to be the end of the world. The ones that are alive at the time are going to be involved in that. But who do they say are the ones that's going to go first? It's the ones that are dead in Christ. That is going to be their time. They're going to be ahead of the ones that are still alive here on the earth. and they're all going to be, raised at the appropriate time. God does everything in an orderly manner. There's no chaos in the things that He does. So the wicked is going to follow after the ones that are raised, and there's going to be a lot of wicked ones that are up there too. Daniel prophesied this in Daniel 12:2. It says, "Many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt." So, this is something that, these Judaizing teachers should understand, because if they had studied the scriptures, Daniel foretold that this was going to happen long before Jesus, walked on this earth. And then in Revelations 20 and 14 and 15, it says, "And death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death, even as the lake of fire. And if any was not found written in the book of life, he was cast into the lake of fire." So then, that goes along with what Daniel was saying there, is that there's going to be a separation. The ones who are going to go, to heaven, and the ones who are going to go to hell. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 24. "Then cometh the end, when he shall deliver up the kingdom to God, even the Father, when he shall have abolished all rule and all authority and power." So there is going to be an end, and this end is going to come. We don't know when that end is going to be. Now, we've talked about this in the past. In the time when the apostles walked the earth, they thought that the end was going to could be at any time. Now, obviously, time goes on, and God has willed that that the earth continue, and that things go on. But there is going to be an end that's going to come, and at the end of this time, all the powers of earth and all the rule and all the things that are here on this earth, it's going to come to an end, and there's going to be one supreme law, and that's going to be the law of God. So at that time, Christ is going to deliver His kingdom up to the Father. Now, the mission of Christ here on the earth was to redeem and rescue the world from the rule of the evil one, or the rule of Satan, or of the devil. And the ones who are in that kingdom are going to be the ones that are going to benefit from the kingdom. And then it says, "When he shall abolish all rule and all authority and all power." Everything that is in the world that exercises any type of rule, authority, or power, except what comes from God, is going to be eliminated. And this was prophesied also, and we'll talk about that here in just a little bit later. But Jesus, the Son of God, he was not sent here to destroy the world, but he was sent here to save the world. The world is going to be destroyed, but God is going to be the one who is going to destroy it. It's kind of hard to destroy something that you didn't create. God created the world. God is the only one who can destroy the world, contrary to some of the beliefs that are out there in this day and time. Sometimes I listen to all this stuff that they talk about, and God's just sitting there laughing at us. How stupid that mankind can be, and some of this stuff, and how ignorant of His word that man is. So, when everything is done, when God has fulfilled all the things that He wants to fulfill, then He's going to destroy the earth, and He's going to follow through on the judgment and all that, and then and only then will there be peace and harmony among men. There's going to be peace and harmony in heaven. There's not going to be any problems or anything like that, and that's God's plan. That's God's plan for it. He says in Matthew 15 and 13, before the consummation shall come, every plant not planted with God shall be rooted up. So all the things that man has put here that God has not put there, it's going to be rooted up and it's going to be destroyed. And every institution or organization of the earth that exerts any type of rule or authority is going to be destroyed. All the material things on the earth is going to be destroyed. And if God didn't plan it, then it's going to be destroyed. There's not going to be any briars or thorns or thistles, or we're not going to have to mow grass in heaven. We're not going to have to plow the fields in heaven. It's all going to be taken care of.
Okay, the finality of it is striking. You and I think everybody knows you and I love history. We like to talk about, read about, study, and so many others do as well. But verse 24 comments on that day, the book is going to be shut. History's over. We won't worry about it anymore.
Right.
Let me record it.
Right.
It's over.
It's done. Verse 25. For he must reign till he hath put all his enemies under his feet. So this has to happen because the scriptures has foretold of it. This is a reference to Psalms 110:1. The Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. He's prophesying about Jesus there. Jesus is there reigning over his kingdom at the right hand of God. And the kingdom cannot be given up till all the rule and all the government have been cast down. So that while the world lasts, Jesus as the Messiah and the mediator, he must reign, and all human beings are properly his subjects, are under his government, and they're all accountable to him. Whether you're a Christian or not, whether you know it or not, you're going to be accountable to Jesus, because he is ruling over the earth as we speak there, and he's there at the right hand of God. And he's exercising his rule and his authority and his dominion over the earth. And man is just basically here, kind of taking care of things until he comes again. But, make no question about it, Jesus is reigning as we speak. And at the appropriate time, all these things here on the earth is going to be destroyed.
That brings up a lot of premillennialists will bring this verse up, only this verse.
Right.
And they'll try to prove it. It's reigning now. His kingdom is on this
Right.
now.
Right.
So, the thing is, and when we say that, does that mean that somehow already gone up? Or is it more like the Baptists and the rapture? You know what I'm saying? That's what they say. It brings up the question, are people up there now, not judge, but...
Well, and they get this deal that Christ failed in his mission when he was here on the earth. He didn't fail in his mission. I mean, you can read all of this and just here in Corinth, he did exactly what he was supposed to do, and there was no failure to it in the deal. And that's he doesn't have to come back and reign 1,000 years to get things straightened back up. Things are already straightened out. We just don't know it sometimes, but it's all straightened out. So right. That was God always has a plan, and we may not see the plan, but it's there. It's an eternal plan, and it's and yeah, you have to laugh. You get into this Big Bang theory and stuff. As you just look at the human body and how intricate it is and how it functions and stuff. We don't understand it now. If we don't understand it now, how could we invent it? That's the thing that just kind of blows my mind. You take a pile of lumber, you put dynamite on it, and you blow it up, and all of a sudden this building comes up. Doesn't happen. That's just the ignorance of man sometimes.
Matthew chapter 2, verses 30 and 35 also go with this same thing thought here. Talk about kingdom and death and reigning over it.
Right. All right, let's look at verse 26. The last enemy that shall be abolished is death. So we know, and we have studied lots of times, that death came as the result of sin. And sin is an enemy of God, and sin is an enemy of man. And while resulting from the sin, it serves as a boundary line for sin beyond which there is no rebellion can go. There's a line there. And when the judgment comes, death is going to be done away with. The ones who are Christians that are in heaven, there is not going to be any death there. We'll have a new body. Don't know what it's going to be like, but we will have a new body, and it's not going to be a corruptible body. We're not going to have to go to the doctor. We're not going to have to take medications. We're not going to do any of that stuff. It'll be a sad day for doctors. Won't have anything for them to do. But they can. I'm sure there'll be doctors in heaven also, and they'll be able to rest.
Death has to be done away with to get rid of the pain and anguish,
Right.
the heartache, the depression that you go when you lose someone.
Right, and it's also, as long as there is sin there has to be death, because death and sin go together. So if you're going to do away with sin, you're going to be doing away with death, and vice versa. And all of this is going to be destroyed, and this is the last enemy that's going to be abolished at the end of the judgment. Everything is finished. Everything is complete, and there will be no sin, and there will be no death. And when Jesus conquered death, but it still is permitted to reign as punishment for sin here on the earth. Jesus was perfect. Jesus didn't sin. He overcame death, and but it still reigns here on the earth, because the time is not right for these things to happen. And when the sin and rebellion have ceased, all the institutions that have grown up out of the rebellion of man shall be destroyed, and then death itself and the last surviving enemy will be destroyed. It talks a lot about that in the Revelation, that at the end, death is going to be destroyed. It's going to be cast into the lake of the fire, because there will be no need for it anymore. And the fact that death shall be destroyed assures the fact that there shall be a general resurrection, and that this is a proof also that after the resurrection there shall be more death. Paul, I don't think could have made it any clearer that there won't be any more death in heaven. In Revelation, the 20th chapter, starting with verse 10, it says, "And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophets are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from those faced the earth, and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, the small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which was the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them, and they were judged every man according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire, and this is the second death. And whomsoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire." And that pretty much sums up the situation. And at that, there's not going to be any secrets. It's all going to be revealed at that time. Comments about that verse. All right, let's look then at verse 27. "For he put all things in subjection under his feet. But when he saith all things are put in subjection, it is evident that he is expected who did subject all things unto him." So these are basically the words that were found in Psalms 8 and 6. And we'll start with verse 5 and read verses 5 and 6. "For thou hast made him a little lower than the angels, and hast crowned him with glory and honor. Thou madest him to have dominion over the works of thy hands, and thou hast put all things under his feet." So the Father has put all of these things under Jesus, the Son's control. And this observation seems to be introduced by the apostle to show that he does not mean that divine nature shall be subjected to human nature. The things of God are the things of God, and the things of man are the things of man. Christ is the Messiah and the mediator between God and man, must ever be considered inferior to the Father, and his human nature, however dignified the consequences of his union with the divine nature, must ever be inferior to God. Jesus is subject to God also. God is the superior being. Even though that we know that Jesus is a God, he still is in subjection to his Father. We know that because Jesus went to the cross, because that's what his Father wanted him to do. Jesus had the power. We could see that by all the miracles that Jesus did. He had the power. He could have come down off that cross, but he didn't, because that was not the will of the Father. So we see all through Jesus' life, he was always under the subjection to his Father, and that's kind of what Paul is talking about here. That even all these things that happen, Jesus is still under the subjection of his Father. Comments about that verse?
This also goes for man as well, because if you go back to Psalm 8, this whole discussion is talking about man. Verse 4, he says, "What's man that you're mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you visit?"
Right.
And this whole discussion by the psalmist is about man as well.
Right. And like everything else, there's and I've talked about this a lot, there's a chain of command. God is the ultimate. Jesus, and we're under Jesus. So I mean, it goes back to God having a plan, and then he's executing his plan.
It's hard to understand a lot of this about the Godhead. We do know by Scripture that Christ is equal to God.
Right.
But he's also subservient to God.
Right.
He's willing to obey what God wants.
Right. Well, and John tells us that, but it's still it's a plan. It was there when the earth was put together.
One of those many things in human mind is hard to get around, because you think of a king, that's the boss.
Right.
But in this case, the king has a boss.
Right. Right. All right. Let's look at verse 28. "And when all things have been subjected unto him, then shall the Son also himself be subjected to him that did subject all things unto him, that God may be all in all." So Jesus came to bring things under subjection to himself. He established the kingdom. He put it in the operational forces, and he was the one who established the rules. Again, and there was people obviously that rebelled against that, but Jesus was the ones who set the rule. The Spirit, the mind of God, revealed all of these things to the apostles to write all these things down. So the apostles, just when they were writing these letters, they were inspired of God. The Holy Spirit inspired them the things that needed to be written. And as a result of that inspiration, we don't see any contradiction in the things that the apostles were teaching. Where the contradictions come in is where man starts to stick things in there that they create things that aren't there, and that's where we get the problem. So Jesus does all of these things to establish his kingdom, and when the work of bringing them into subjection has been completed, when the world ends, when everybody is in subjection to God, he will be under subjection to God too, just like it was in the beginning. And now God or Jesus has everything under his feet, but God is the ultimate ruler of the universe. And in the end, and in heaven, when the earth has come to an end, God will be supreme. Jesus will be supreme also, but Jesus is still going to be subject to God, and he is going to obey the will of the Father, just like we need to obey the will of the Father. And all the places will honor and obey the Father. There won't be any denying God. There's that stupid commercial now of Ronnie Reagan, that he's out there and he's not scared to burn in hell. Well, he's going to find out. That. I would hate to be on TV and make a statement like that. That's that. But that's the mindset that some people have, and they're going to find out in judgment. Kind of messed that one up, a little bit wrong on that one.
Interesting. Probably the best relation to what's being described in verse 28 is an abdication. We know in history that monarchs have abdicated, or they still will. In a sense, that's what Jesus is doing when the kingdom's been delivered. The kingdom's been delivered to the Father. Christ's work as king is over.
And and the thing about it is, and God is going to honor him for doing what he was supposed to do. He will still be worthy of honor, and it's not completely like abdicating the throne, because there's still going to be honor there. He's completed the mission, type of thing. So as the Father will always remain a father, so the Son will also remain a son. For the Son is of the highest, will reign over his people forever, and the Son will be the priest and the conciliator forever. So it's not like Jesus is just going to go away and he's not going to be significant anymore. He will still have a role in heaven. Comments about that verse? Okay, this next section that we're going to go into, verses 29 through 34, is a completion of the argument by showing the conduct of Christ's witnesses to be inexplicable if there is no resurrection. So what Paul's going to do in this last section is he's going to pull all of these things together and finish this section of his discussion with the people there in Corinth. I've spent a lot of time on this particular verse because the scholars, and I mean, I've got probably 9 different commentaries that I go through and look at stuff, and there's 9 different opinions on this verse of exactly what the verse says. Most of them kind of have the same idea. They just say it in a different way. But there's a couple of them that are way out there on some of these opinions. And if you have a copy of Adam Clark's commentary, he doesn't comment a whole lot on this particular verse, but he makes a whole lot of very good statements that really sums up this whole section of the thing. And if you've got that commentary, it would be a good thing to go through and read. He makes 10 comments, and I'm only going to use one of them at the end when we talk about this. But he makes a lot of very good observations about the resurrection. I think is worthy for anybody to read.
For those who understand or heard a little bit about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that this is a key doctrine. They have done this over the years. I mean, you've had people go in to a Mormon temple and be baptized 20 and 30 times for dead relatives. I mean, as ridiculous as it sounds.
In relation to that, Bill, I just read an article, I think it was just yesterday, that said that they averaged 5,000 people worldwide each and every day.
A day.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And yet their own book contradicts that. I forget
The Book of Mormon.
Yeah, the end of the Book of Mormon, maybe one of the books, Allen or all, or I can't remember the reference. Their own book contradicts what they practice.
Well, I'll tell you what, this is going to be such a good subject. We only got about 30 seconds left. I think we'll pick that up next week because I'm sure that we'll have a lot of discussion about this particular verse. So appreciate everybody's attention and comments today. We'll pick up next week with verse 29. Oh, I mean, some of the commentaries are way out there. Way out there.